Well, hello out there. Welcome to the Monday Airwindows Livestream. I'm going to do my usual thing of opening a tab for GitHub in case anybody asks any coding questions. There's been a slight change in the GitHub, but it doesn't affect Airwindows. And hey, Torgal. I got our chat up. I've got paper and pen, technically a Tombow ABT marker, because it doesn't cause fumes. And I am about ready to roll with our usual Airwindows question and answer, or whatever else it is that we do live stream. And I suppose what I can do is bring you up to speed with what's been going on in Airwindows land. Here, hang on, let me check and make sure that, yep. Hey David, how's it going? So essentially, oh, and I've made my coffee, so I have coffee. I have all kinds of things. I have coffee and I have an orb. I'll show that to you later. Don't worry, it's allowed for you to show orbs on YouTube, depending upon the kind of orb. We're not talking about a part of my physical person orb. We're talking about, well, an orb. You'll see. And yesterday, actually very late, because it took me a long time to get it together, because it was a very long video and it took a long time to upload. I released Remap. And basically what Remap does is it'll take a sine wave and kind of doctor it until it's acting a little more like a triangle wave. Essentially what it tries to do is reconstruct stuff, and it can't make a really sharp point because that would be too crazy of a transfer function, but it tries to put back things that can be soft clipped off or squished in a mix. I've already seen some arguments saying this is not a peak reconstructor. If you had, say, this, then it wouldn't be able to do anything about that, which is absolutely correct. It can't. But essentially what goes on with that is you wind up, somebody brought to my attention another plugin of this nature. You can wind up with a more complicated plugin trying to predict what is beyond the clip, and it literally has to make it up every single time. Like, it really doesn't know what's been clipped off because that data is lost. So sort of interpolating makes sense. You can do stuff where you're like identifying vibrations that are going into the clip and then trying to sustain them or blend them with whatever is going on out of the clip. It's going to be very high CPU. It's going to require a lot of latency, which mine has no latency at all. And it's faking it. So as much as I've seen very clever things about reconstructing clips, that Remap is not about that. Remap is just another transfer function, just another reshaping. And I should explain what a transfer function is because I refer to that fairly often. Supposing you're having a increasing voltage and it just sort of goes up. In fact, it would be better if I made these X's because it's better if it's vertical tick marks. Now this is a graph of other people's plugin, in one that was drawn to my attention, I think maybe on KVR or in Gearsluts, was one that was guessing what the peak was and filling it in. Mine doesn't do that. Mine is just a transfer function. And I will explain what that is right now. You didn't miss much, Bo. I have not unleashed the orb yet. I'm going to be teasing you guys about the orb this entire time because it's a funny visual gag. And no, it's not the musician. I have an album by that musician, The Adventures in the Ultra World, but it is not that musician either. So rather than being a waveform, consider that this is just a chart. It's a graph that goes from no voltage to lots of voltage. So a transfer is taking one set of inputs and telling it to be a different set of inputs. Like, what I'll do is I'll draw a soft clip, and it'll go up like this, and then go over like that. So if your voltage was going up, the soft clip is going to say, if your input voltage is like these, it's going to be the same. If your input voltage is this one, then use this instead. That's what a transfer function is. We're talking about remap, and I refer to transfer functions, so I'm explaining what that is when I say that. So a transfer function is any time the input signal is in this place, move it down to here. And when you do that, what you can get is like something where if you took a waveform and you told it to do that transfer function, and it was on the other side as well, you'd smooth things off. It would be a distortion. In fact, this is the way that some Eurorack modules, some synthesizer modules, get sine waves or sine wavy things, because there's a basic electronic circuit, and I'm going to draw that too because I might as well. This might be a little scattered. I've yet to begin to drink my coffee in serious earnest, so here is a electronic circuit. So that's a op amp. Those are in guitar pedals, Eurorack modules. There's in lots of places. I have crap loads of those things in little tubes ready to be wired into stuff. And you can do a thing where, I'm trying to remember exactly how you set it up. I think what you do is you have a capacitor and a resistor. So this is your audio, right? This is just a thing. It might be what's called a Schmitt trigger. Inverter, it's a thing called an inverter, meaning that you go into the minus and the output is possibly amplified, but it is also the opposite of what you put in. Like you put in a 0, you get a 1. Put in a 1, you get a 0. Now, what we do with a thing like this, especially if it's a Schmitt trigger, because the Schmitt trigger means it can't be floating exactly in the middle. It's going to go to one of the extremes to start up. So it's guaranteed to start up. This is a capacitor. This is the minus input, which flips the phase around. It's like a phase switch as a plug-in or as a physical switch on a mixing board or something like that. And here's the output. So In fact, I think the Schmidt trigger is like a comparator. There's things where you can have it produce one extreme or the other on the output, and I think that's the concept I'm fooling with. It's a little ambiguous. I'm not going to explain it super well. But my point being, I started talking about this when talking about making a triangle wave and turning it into a sine wave. I'm going to explain something that some of the Eurorec modules do. And we'll see how that works out. So let's say this output is a square wave. It's very possible to make these out of really simple chips. It might be, I'm not sure if you can do it literally from just op amps, but there's plenty of circuits that can do that. There's logic circuits that more or less expect to put out either a full positive or full zero. And that's how you get a square wave output. And the square wave output is what is causing it to be a frequency, because what's happening is if it is 0, you got this resistor that's connecting it to the input again, and the input is holding a voltage because there's this capacitor here. A capacitor holds voltages and stores energy in that way. They come in all different sizes. We'll say this is some kind of medium-sized one. It'll make a musical note. The way it does that is, if this is a high frequency, if this is a high voltage, I'm sorry, and it's holding voltage in the capacitor, so it's going to stay as a high voltage. And this is a resistor, which is maybe kind of large. It's hundreds of kilo ohms, and it's inverting, so that makes this be 0. 0 is like ground. 0 is like no voltage. So the resistor is taking energy out of this system. It's taking energy away from the capacitor because the resistor lets electricity through slowly. And the high voltage means this is at 0 down here. So it'll just continue to drain until the point where the circuit flips and goes from the one extreme to the other. And when it does that, this has been drained of its voltage until it's now low voltage again. And then the circuit flips. This is one of your circuits that is going to give either one extreme or the other. And all of a sudden, this is a high voltage because it's decided to flip to the high voltage section. So it goes from 0 to high voltage. And now the energy is going the other way. And the resistor is letting stuff go through until the capacitor is charged up enough that usually use a CMOS chip called the 40106, which I believe functions as a sort of comparator. I'm not sure whether it's restricted to the Schmidt trigger voltages that it uses, but it's capable of doing this stuff really well. So the high voltage is now giving energy back through into here. And it's charging up this capacitor, which will eventually get to the point where it's ready to flip it again. When the energy is high enough here, because enough has gotten through from the output of the circuit, then boop, it goes to high up here, and this flips down to low again, and there we go. So the size of the capacitor matters, and the size of the resistor matters, because this is where, when you have little sort of homebrew synthesizers made out of this chip, it's usually a pot. It's a potentiometer. It's a dial that you can control. You could also use photocells, CDS cells, which are things that change resistance based on the brightness of the light shining on them. And you hook those up with LEDs and make your own what are called Vactrols. And Vactrols are a very popular thing in modular synthesis. Here's the thing. What's the voltage look like here? We know the voltage in the output is a square wave. That's all well and good. But the voltage at this point is a nice steady triangle wave. because what it's doing is it's charging up to the point where this one flips, and then it's charging down to the point where it flips again. So you get two waveforms out of this one little piece of a chip, and you get multiple ones of these on a 40106 chip. You can also get a triangle wave. And if you put a triangle wave through a soft clip, like there's another CMOS chip, a 4049 or 4069, which is just an inverter. And when you bias that one to run in the middle of its range, it's like a tube sound fuzz. In fact, there's a famous Craig Anderton homebrewed circuit called tube sound fuzz that uses this chip and just wires it up so you can run a guitar through it. If you run this triangle wave through one of these fuzz circuits at exactly the right amplitude, it'll smooth off the point. There'll be a little tick where it changes. Just a tiny dot, because there'll be a change in mode there. It's going from here to the one point and then down. And one thing you could do about that if you wanted to do this and straighten it out is you can filter that as well. The tube sound fuzz thing is, again, a transfer function. It's one of these, but in electronics. So what happens is if you have a triangle wave that is very high frequency, the tube sound fuzz thing will still give you your sort of fake, I'm drawing it poorly, but whatever, your sort of fake sine wave out of it. It doesn't care what the frequency is because it's not a frequency-based filter. It's a amplitude-based filter. It's just sort of fuzzing out. It's saturating. It's changing the transfer function and making bits of it be quieter. You know, 1 volt going in is maybe a little less than 1 volt. 2 volts going in is like 1.3 or whatever. It starts to clip. It's soft clipping. And that doesn't relate to frequency at all. You could put radio frequencies through something like this, and it would still give you a nice sine wave or wave-shaped output. Wave-shaped output. There's a wave-shaved. That I gotta have to invent a wave shaver, obviously. That'd be cool. Be a good name for a plugin. And that's what we do with the triangle waves if we're trying to use a transfer function, soft clipping function, to get it to behave like it's a sine wave when it's not. Yeah, harmonics are quite a different thing. Essentially, and that's a very interesting point, because logically, what that means is if you have a triangle wave, triangle waves do have harmonics. If you run it through a soft clipper, the soft clipper, if it is able to convert it into a sine wave style thing, the soft clipper will be taking away harmonics rather than adding them. And that's fascinating. It never occurred to me that that was the thing that would happen, but that's logically what's going on. I didn't realize that you could take away harmonics with soft clipping, but in some cases, apparently that is true. No news on the sorting samples algorithm. Maybe at some point. That's a far future thing, because I'm not sure how that's going to unfold. Hey, hardware, presumably. Being the warm audio EQPs. I don't know what those are, but I'm assuming they're hardware of some kind. I have built tube circuitry at times myself, although I haven't done a lot of it, and it's not the safest thing necessarily. Now, it's building it, I mean. Because if you're fooling around with the electricity and soldering stuff, and the circuit still holds 600 volts, you could be in trouble. So, also bear in mind, I showed you this triangle wave, especially David interested in taking away harmonics with soft clipping. If you start with this, you can't do anything. If you start with a square wave, there are only two positions on this that you could reshape with the transfer function. So you can't do anything regarding soft clipping or remap or anything else to alter that. Basically, your hard clips are, you're just stuck with it. You're not going to be able to use the transfer function to reshape those. It has to be a smoother thing. It has to be a soft clip in order to be able to reshape them. Now here's one of the things about transfer functions is you can do weird stuff. Stuff that does unusual transfer functions. Like this one would be making stuff louder until you get to this point, making stuff a lot quieter, and then full clipping. The way this transfer function would be shaped is the quiet bits are actually getting louder, and then there's this area where the output doesn't change very much. It's a kind of flat spot. And then that continues. It's like a soft clip. And then it changes again and starts getting louder in a big hurry. And this is essentially what remap is doing. Remap is a funny sort of variation on the usual sine wave transfer function algorithm that is combining them so that essentially what I'm doing is going like, okay, when, and this is from a previous drawing, that's from essentially last week. This all happened very quickly. One of the handy things about doing the live stream is that when people just shoot ideas, occasionally the idea goes, bing, oh, that's a thing, I should do that, and then it happens, sometimes within a week. But in your sine wave algorithm, if you're using that to do a transfer function, it starts getting louder along with your audio, and then as it keeps going up, it starts flattening out until around an input of 1.57 something 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 half of pi. And at that point, not only is it no longer getting louder, it starts turning around and getting softer. This is the flat point. This is the hard clip point. And when I put in saturations on stuff, and exactly, then it turns around and gets quieter. So the question becomes, can you go, if the input is above 1.5, then take whatever this is, and it's 1.5 minus whatever the algorithm basically, to say whatever this is, make it turn around so that it slowly starts going up again. That's remap. Remap is exactly this S-shaped transfer curve, and just altered until it is in the form of a plugin. And there's an interesting side effect to that. If you start running signals through that, because I did all of my early research just looking at the waveforms off of sines and triangles and things, mostly triangles. And it was useless doing it as just a mathematical exercise. Turns out what you need is to doctor it in such a way that it does something kind of like this. If you turn up remap really high, you start getting waveforms like this. It's doing its thing, but it's kind of going in and out a little bit up to the point where this is the area that's going to give you the triangle-y type shapes out of a sine wave. This is the area, yeah. The slider sort of increases and redoubles the oscillations of it until you start getting these places where it just pulls energy out of the distorted parts and spreads them out. Like this area here is the part that's going to make distorted stuff stop being distorted stuff. It reshapes it and puts it back to what it originally was. Then if you go a little bit louder than that, all of a sudden it's distorting like hell. And that's plainly heard whenever you fool with it. I don't have any solution for that because it's part of the overall algorithm, the way that it works. But the whole heart of this idea is that it's possible to do this little calculation in such a way that it makes this transition seamlessly. It's just going through in these flat areas, so the switch from the one angle to the other angle is completely smooth. And then it starts reversing the transfer function again. I know, right? Hey, but since it's very smooth going through this point, what ends up happening is you get to expand just the area you need to expand. The idea is you start turning up remap until it comes into focus. And by focus, what I mean is that the area where it's starting to expand a lot, but before it starts distorting again, needs to be sitting at the point where your soft clipping is kicking in. And in theory, it'll do this, and it also reduces the effect very strongly as it gets closer to zero, much like spiral. In fact, it's almost like a double spiral in that it's doing that effect twice as much as spiral does, because it really, I don't want to mess with the heart of the sound. That's why for many signals, it doesn't sound as if remap can do anything at all. David, to you, maybe it does. Okay, so to everybody it does. But it doesn't matter. It's abstract enough. Nobody cares. And you should be talking about that. You're the one with the girlfriend, not me. No wonder I'm drawing women's breasts. No, it's a transfer function. The idea is you turn up remap. In fact, this is too distracting. We're going to lose people. You turn up remap to the point where your distortion starts to open up on the top part of this curve. If you've gone beyond that to the point where it's doing a real hard grind, that's because you've gone past this region to where it's clipping. And it's kind of set up in such a way where it will go to that zone. And you can do that. That actually gives you a doubly curved transfer function where basically you can expand, but you still get to clip the hottest peaks. And I know, hottest peaks, right? This is going to be a funny stream. This is the Monty Python style know what I mean, know what I mean, know what I mean stream. Wait till you see my orb. So in a sense, remap is like a output level clipper, except for it's not really designed to clip to, exactly distortion. Instead, it's putting information back in again that was clipped off, and that'll get you boosts. That'll get you peaks that are considerably hotter than the maximum output level that you would otherwise have. So if anybody has other questions about remap, you can fire them off and I'll get to them. Or indeed, if anybody has questions about whatever, then you can fire those off and I'll get to them. Because that probably covers how remap works. And since it's such a strong effect, that's why the dry wet. Originally, I coded it up without the dry wet being in there, and quickly realized, because I often don't like using dry wet controls, and even I wanted them. Even I was like, oh man, this thing really needs the dry wet control in there, because it would give this very striking sound. And why does remap only sound good with all parameters at 1 on tracks that are -3? Oh, that's not necessarily the case. It depends upon what you need out of it. But probably what you're dealing with is If the track doesn't peak loud enough, then it's not going to engage. Remap is really geared towards stuff that has been clipped flat or is just tracked really hot or something like that. And also, this is David Pixley talking, so sound good is a very subjective concept there. But if you can't get it to make a noise, it's probably because it's not needed. You can run loud into it or a gain stage into it if you need to, but it's designed to handle stuff that has been clipped or soft clipped or like mastered to be too loud. So it's kind of pre-designed to work with that sort of thing. Yeah. Idimeditavi Corpzone asks, would it be possible to turn it upside down? Well, here's the thing. It kind of does. If you have a ambient soundscape, and the ambient soundscape is using the full range of the audio rather than being quiet, you can probably get it to sound bigger, or just soundstage it to the point where it'll bring a little bit more size and volume to things. And I might end up using that in some stuff. Like I could see trying to make a reverb plugin and incorporating that as part of the sound. That could be a thing. Bo has an interesting thought. Instead of sorting samples between zero crossing, would it be possible to generate a sine wave between zero crossings? Signs point to yes. That'd be a lot simpler. Mind you, it wouldn't give you all of the idea of the sorting samples between zero crossings would mean that you could have a sine wave or you could have other weird waves depending upon what kind of audio content you had in there. And it would be a lot more flexible, so I think it would be a lot more interesting. However, it totally would be possible to generate a sine wave between zero crossings, or even just have it, if your buffer is not long enough, you could probably just sort of have it throw in garbage zero crossings in order to get, basically if you didn't have legitimate zero crossings, what you could do, and it might be worth having it be dynamic sensitive as well. What you do is you'd be recording the timeline recording the sample buffer. You'd be measuring the zero crossings, and you just keep track of what was the loudest one in that group. Then you generate the sine wave and amplify it to be the peaking out at the loudest one in that group. And then you would have the sort of sine-based version of that idea. And at every zero crossing, it'll get kind of weird, and there'll be corners in all the zero crossings because it would typically not be all the same. So it would have a weird sound that wouldn't actually respond normally to clipping. It'd be acting kind of like this. You'd have your generated sine waves, and see if it was the sorted kind of one, then it'll do those zero transitions more gracefully, most likely. But with just generating a sine wave, if you have a loud sample in here somewhere, the entire thing gets turned to a sine wave. Then you got maybe a quieter one, there's a sharp corner here, and an even sharper corner when you go to zero. So you're going to get essentially a really crazy kind of type B distortion on top of your supposedly warm, bassy sine wave bass thing. So hey, that's worth trying will generate just sine functions between. Might not be next week. I've got a couple of things coming out that I would like to get around to, but this is something that could be played with. It's not going to sound very nice, but then we don't always like nice, do we? Sometimes we like crazy, weird things that are sort of strange, so there might be a way of doing that. But the simplest and most primitive way would be to just do the direct conversion so I'm writing down sine function between zero crossings. Would definitely be easier than sorting. And who's to say it might not be some kind of spiral-like thing that I can smooth the bits in the middle there. But that's definitely a possibility. It's worth trying. If I can make that work, I totally will make it work, and I will give it to you for free, as always. One of the useful things with having Chris on the job. And it'll provide one of those crazy sounds where you'll really think that I had an orb. Oh, I mentioned orb. I should tell you about the orb. I have an orb. You've probably seen orbs before. There have been famous, like, news photographs and stuff of orbs having, people doing things with orbs. Well, I have an orb. Check it out. It's my orb. This is an orb. So, now if you look at the bottom of the orb, you can see that it has a power cable, because there's a light in here. And if I zoom this orb right in at you, you'll be able to see what it actually is, which is a globe. But it's a lighted globe. So this is my orb. There are orbs like it, but this one is mine. And I thought it would be fun to show you that. My flickering orb. Oh no, it's going off. What'll I do? What will I do? This was in my dad's basement. My dad and mom passed away last year. And when we went to clear out the house and throw a whole bunch of stuff in dumpsters, I decided that I should not throw this in dumpsters because it was just a cool thing. Which it is. It's like, it is a National Geographic globe, and compiled and drawn in the Cartographic Division of the National Geographic Society, copyright 1962. So this is actually a political boundaries globe of 1962. And as you might imagine, it maybe isn't the most current thing. Like, for instance, we've still got USSR on this globe. This is not up to date, not even slightly. But it's kind of neat because the basic land boundaries are mostly the same. All the land is a little tiny bit smaller now, but it probably wouldn't show on this. And we've got things like, I recently watched, I think, reading about or something like that, the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And it turned up in a semi-local video store. I go into Keene, New Hampshire, and it was there for about $4 for a Blu-ray, so I got that. And sure enough, here is the Caribbean. And you can get a sense of stuff like that. Like, the Caribbean is about 3 Texases. And me traveling to places up in Vermont is a very tiny little space. And contrary to what it looks like on typical maps, Greenland is a little small thing. Greenland is not all that large. So if you've got a globe, it shows you a lot of interesting stuff, like the sizes of various places as they actually are, rather than how they're drawn on maps, which are two-dimensional projections. And that's just a concept that is kind of interesting. You know, you've got a lot of stuff going on. For instance, Hawaii over here. The size of the Pacific Ocean is really quite huge. This is a big body of water. And you can get a sense of that by looking at a globe, or an orb, and seeing that if, you know, from the right angle, you can barely see a landmass in any direction at all. Whereas in other places, like South America, Africa is a very big continent. There's just a lot of stuff going on. And that's one of the interesting things about the world, is the changes that go on. And like, I showed you a picture of the USSR back when it was a thing. You can see for yourself. Here is in Africa. Here is the US. Africa is way the heck bigger than the US. The US is about the size of Algeria and Libya and Chad, Nigeria, Mali, Mauritania. Again, this is 1962. I'm not really sure what the, some of these borders can have changed. Oh, here's a funny one. At least in 1962, the United States is about the size of Brazil. Check it out. There's that. And there's Brazil. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff to consider with orbs and globes and such. I was going to show you the USSR and say the reason I have Linux-based VSDs is because somebody who lives there helped me with it and wrote a script for generating them, which is a script that I use to this day. And yeah, Canada is a little smaller than the US. It might look huge, but that's because of the projection. So I think we have had enough fun with orbs, and we're going on to the actual audio questions again. We will throw this sine function thing over in my category of I'm going to fool with this and see what I can make happen. So, yeah, honestly, I might just be able to make an algorithm that would, well, no. I'd still have to have essentially an infinite buffer in order to do literally anything as a sine wave. But I don't know, I might be able to come up with ways of doing stuff. So, D. Esser, David says, I should probably coach you until you're able to put together some of these plugins for yourself, although that might be a big ask, because even though I'm not especially clever with compiling and such, I did still grow up on computers and things. One of the things I'd quite like to do, similar to my whipping out an orb and showing people, is I have a Apple IIe, and it would be quite a lot of fun to have the Apple IIe on cam, on screen, and code some stuff using it and letting you see the essentially TV output of that. Is probably possible to do. I just haven't quite got there yet. But it's a real physical Apple IIe. And the interesting thing about this is something else that I read recently, is I'm just reading other things that people have said. Another interesting thing about an Apple IIe is that the latency with typing stuff into the computer, especially in things like web browsers, has increased and increased and increased over the years, where no matter how much faster the computer actually gets and its ability to do calculations, the responsiveness of the keyboard has gotten worse over time. That's not always the case. Like, I think iPhones do fairly well for themselves in that light, but it mostly is the case, and it certainly is the case with desktops. And that is borne out by the fact that if you're typing on an Apple IIe or an Apple II Plus or something like that, with your TV showing the output of it and stuff, the character that you typed shows up on the screen faster on the Apple II than it does on modern computers that are a million, billion, zillion times faster. And I think that's kind of cute and adorable. There's some interesting things about all of that, which even relate to what Patrick mentions about jitter, which I'm going to talk about too. That one of the things about that, or indeed the old Ataris that David mentions, is they're real-time operating systems. The CPU doesn't run that fast, but when you program them, you have complete control of the thing. They don't run on threads. They don't run with multiple processors or anything like that. So stuff doesn't get parceled out and handed out to various places. Even the computer chips themselves these days are able to do stuff like, okay, put this over here and then calculate these things and then calculate this and so on. Even the CPUs themselves are like multi-threaded. But the really old stuff, and that notably includes the Ataris, that people are into those old Ataris for things like MIDI sequencing. One of the reasons that matters is that you can get old MIDI sequencers on these incredibly primitive computers that are essentially real-time operating systems. Like, the operating system can't do a damn thing while your program is running through its loops and counting cycles in order to do that. So you can make the timing of these antique machines be more accurate than the timing out of modern machines, no matter how fast they are. And that's interesting. It's especially interesting seeing as I have this, modular stuff, and it uses things like trigger inputs and such. And the Apple II has these slots in them that are essentially doing logic outputs and inputs. So in theory, it should be possible to take a Apple II, program it in, say, assembly language, which I never got up to doing myself. Like, you can do things in BASIC, they're just not very efficient. But you can do things in BASIC using commands called peek and poke for memory locations. And in that light, assuming that you can identify a memory location that is like this position on this slot of the added slot part, it should be possible to write a basic program that runs, it's like 10, do something, 20, go to 10, so it just keeps going until you kill it. And go, okay, look at this value in memory, which presumably is, I'm going to be looking into this because it seems like a fun thing to do, which presumably is the voltage position of that slot, a position on that slot, and look at the value of that. If the value of that is 1, meaning it's over a certain voltage, then do something, otherwise do something else. And you could say, like, if this value and this value are not the same, like they're either 1 and 0 or 0 and 1. And granted, you could do this with chips, but I'm saying like in programming, but on the anti-computer, that you could do a exclusive OR gate. It's only the one or the other, but not both or neither. And in theory, you could watch what's on the cards and have Eurorack jacks hooked in to those cards so that you had, it was a Eurorack capable Apple II. And then program it either in assembly language or in, and remember, if you program it in assembly language, you can do things like really crude sampled audio, just all kinds of stuff. It does run fast enough for some of those things. Then you'd be able to do calculations in the computer and give an output on another Eurorack output that's just patched into that. And there's a lot of positions on these card slots inside the Apple II. In fact, it might be too much of a pain in the butt to go and drag it out and open it up and show it to you. Maybe that's for another time. Maybe that's something I can do later this afternoon. But point being, and Yelp too. I think I may have already done that. Look up tape delay. That will feed back for you, I think. I think it does. I'm pretty sure the regeneration of that one will do it. It doesn't do that much else, but I think you can get it to do that. So try that one for starters. And if you can identify more things about feedback delay, I do have on the agenda, I'm going to put glitch shifter out again. That's not a delay, however, but it does have delay-like qualities to it. Anyway, let me look up a little bit before stuff scrolls by too fast. De-esser that slides. Well, you might be able to do that with other things as well. I do still need to do the de-esser that will give you only the S sound, though. I need to be able to give you that, and I haven't done that yet, so that's on the agenda too. In fact, that's so much on the agenda that I'm going to write it down. Because the stuff you're asking for, you could do yourself if you had the de-esser that had a setting that showed you only the S'd out content. So that's DS with monitoring. That is another motivation for me to put that more forward in the queue, because obviously there's things people can do with it. And you can't right now because it doesn't let you, so I'll fix that. Where I start when coding a plugin is with the templates that I put together. So there's the thing. That might be also another Patreon goal. It's like, oh, hey, I'll code on stream every week. That's something I could do. And that depends. I'd probably have to set up I'd need to be in a position where I could set up another camera, because like I code sitting in a particular chair and in a particular context. That could change, but it would require a little more technical support, I think. So, let me continue looking over some of these things. Live coding is not out of the question, but I need a little more technical support for it first. And it'd also be really slow, and it also might not actually work. Like, for coding, one of the things that I'll often do is stuff will get really quiet for me. I won't be engaging with anybody. I won't be listening to any music. I won't be doing anything like that unless it is really mechanical, like just basic going through the motions. I already know what's going to happen type of coding. If I do anything creative, I need silence. I even have on my desk in easy reach a pair of earplugs, which is more for writing stuff rather than coding stuff, but I've used it for coding stuff as well. If I really need to focus, I'll put in earplugs. I suppose if I wanted to go really hardcore, I could put in earplugs and wear sunglasses. But just like cutting down the outside sensory information so that I can focus on what is going on in my head, however uncomfortable or inconvenient that might be. So let's see now. The multi-head tape delay, kind of like a Roland Space Echo type deal or something like that. I could probably do something like, I've done things like that before. I just couldn't necessarily, it might not be exactly the one that you have in mind. If I'm not mistaken, that space station one is kind of like that. Combating distortion from remap. You essentially can't combat distortion. Oh, well, hang on. I'm getting confused. You so often talk about ULaw that I thought you meant ULaw. Silly me. I'll pay better attention. Essentially, as far as remap is concerned, what you need to do is not be applying distortion in the first place. If you've turned the remap control up so far that it's generating lots of distortion, then the only real cure is to turn it back down again. Because that's just the way that it works, is you can't take away extra crunch that remap puts in. It's designed so that it's expanding outwards peaks that are kind of inaudible, and they're just sort of the mojo of the sound. And if you're starting to hear a big obvious example, that's probably already too much. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Metric Halo DS has the monitor style mode. It's good. It should be in mine. It's not yet, but I'll be setting it up. Modern version of Stutter Edit, which is actually live cut. See, that's an interesting question. Because I have some idea what some of those things are. I just haven't tended to do them exactly the way they're possible. Like literal buffer smashers and stuff is more of an abstract question, and it's possible, but there haven't been many things I've done to that nature. Again, I mentioned glitch shifter, and what glitch shifter is a attempt at a pitch shifter that tracks zero crossings and predicts the rejoining of waveforms so that it can splice stuff with no interpolation between samples. The idea was to try to make a pitch shifter that was super raw and direct sounding. And in some ways it kind of worked, but then it also throws all these weird, crazy glitches all over the place. And they're often kind of smooth, but depending upon how intensely you make it try to do only perfect splices, it can screw up the audio and timing of things so badly that it becomes useless for anything other than glitch work. So there is that. Oh, and also I made it so that it feeds back on itself, because why not? So that's another thing that I have on the agenda that I'll be trying to bring out. I've got pretty much June to work on some of that stuff, so it would be like July or August or so when that came out. I gotta say, glitch shifter is better than most glitch things because it does that seamless interpolation. So the glitches that one produces are less crunchy and digital sounding and more sort of generally weird and abstract and doing unexpected things. I wouldn't be surprised if the Weiss de-esser is excellent. Weiss is generally good at stuff. In fact, I might end up using one of their hardware pieces to get converters together and get my Lavry back as monitoring, and then get a Lavry analog to digital converter for capturing the jams and mixes and stuff. And I am looking to do that. But it's going to be a while because those are expensive pieces of gear. And I can't just do those just off the top of my head. I'll sell the orb and then I'll be able to buy those pieces of gear. Anyway, Idimitavi, I'm not sure if I do know the secret sauce behind Roland chorus units. I've worked out some stuff around choruses, but I couldn't necessarily tell you exactly. I can look into it some more. Off the top of my head, that doesn't ring a bell. It doesn't. I know the secret sauce behind the Rockman chorus. Oh, cool. Monatorium is throwing money. I still don't know whether that necessarily goes to me or whether it just sits around at YouTube, so don't feel as if you need to do that, but thank you regardless. What it probably does is it probably makes it that much sooner that I can tell YouTube to actually send me $100, which is about once every couple of years. So throwing money by virtue of live streams and stuff, like, cool. If you like doing that, that's good. Probably what that means is that, you know, before next year, I'll be able to tell YouTube, hey, send me $100 out of the bank that you keep with the views and things and stuff, the AdSense money or whatever it is that they've got. So yeah, secret sauce behind Roland chorus units. So I'll tell you, one of the things that's going on with various chorus units is that some of them do their pitch kind of like this. So the sound will be sharp and then it will swoop down and be really flat for just a brief moment, like, I think the way that's being done is the speed of the playback is steadily increasing until it resets itself. Like, rather than being a sine wave thing which has equal amounts of time sharp and flat, the pitch of the playback, it's catching up and catching up and catching up on a steady basis until it suddenly drops. And that is definitely what's happening in Rockman stereo chorus, is that they're going to try to make it so that the pitch is steadily more, and then it'll kind of swerve for a bit. It'll drop down a lot flatter, but not for as long. And it doesn't really spend any time in equal amplitude. You could also do it with a triangle shape, where it's going like steadily sharp until it hits a point, and then it's suddenly steadily flat, and then it hits a point and it's suddenly steadily sharp again. And that will create, again, the sudden pitch swerve of the frequency. And I don't think you can do a thing where you've got it in stereo and then you just switch sides upon changing the positions, because I don't think it's that simple. Now the Roland stuff, one of the things about the Roland stuff is that it sums to mono and the bass frequencies better than you would otherwise have. Like, the Roland stuff does chorusy things, but I think some of it is like there's a high pass factor to it, where those things are, it's like there's a crossover, and the crossover below a certain point, it tends to stay mono. And the stuff that they're doing with the overlaid, delayed copies and spreading stuff out and so on tends to be more in the mid-range and higher frequencies. And that's one of the ways that, because I've got multiple, like my sound as far as synthesizers is concerned is definitely all about the Alpha Junos. I got a couple of Alpha Junos on the wall, and I'm going to be looking to get a Alpha Juno 2 for actually being able to play live, because the Juno 1s don't have velocity or aftertouch. And they can work with velocity and aftertouch, but the keyboard doesn't give you any of that, so the keyboards on those are fairly useless. But you can get one that has velocity and aftertouch, and also it works real good with the guitar to MIDI thing. I've been using that recently. So I am familiar with the Roland Chorus. I haven't actually had, although I have had the opportunity to play with when I was younger, your Jupiter 8s and stuff like that. Or the Juno 106, I think, is the one that I've gotten to play with. And yeah, that's the Alpha Junos are the ones where you can change the rate of the chorus at will, from really slow to entirely too fast, which is part of getting a sound out of them some of the time. And in the Juno 106, you have like 2 options for chorus settings, and only those. So there's a reason why I like the Alpha Juno so much, but they're basically the same kind of circuit, and I think in each case, it's generating stereo, starting from a mono setting, and then the chorusing is happening in the mids, but it's not going all the way down to the bass. So the bass doesn't go full chorused. And that's part of the secret sauce. I just don't, and that would follow for old school mixers used to put on bass a lot, because that makes all the sense in the world to put on bass. However, I can't guarantee that is the secret sauce, only that I can confirm that the Roland Chorus works super well on bass, and it doesn't actually make the bass cancel out nearly as much as other choruses might. So maybe that was what you needed, I don't know. Tape heads with crazy stuff, yep. I'll even write that down, because clearly I can see people being into that, definitely. Tape heads, delay. It'll wind up with a lot of sliders maybe, so that's a problem, but I might be able to do, because one of the things that happens, you see, here's the thing. Here's one of the things about how this stuff works. And oh boy, okay, I'm going to do a lot of catching up. The way stuff like simple versus complicated works is you can get into that sort of melda zone. Whitesea, the snake oil guy, recently did a video. Either that, or since I'm a patron, I get to see his video and you don't. I'm not sure whether it's out yet, but I got to see it, where he went over one of those plugins that was a reverb plugin, and it was one of those Melda-style-y ones where you could do literally any damn thing you could possibly imagine. And he was shouting me out in it like, this is a reverb for Airwindows, Chris of Airwindows. And the funny thing is, like, no, I don't like those. You spend your whole time fooling around with it, and it's completely kind of content agnostic. It doesn't have a sound, except that the processing of it has a sound, so all of the all passes are going to sound like the Melda all passes, whatever those might be. All of the comb filters and delays are going to sound like the Melda comb filters and delays. The EQ is going to sound like the Melda EQ, however that might be. Those do have a sound of their own that you're not going to get away from. But it's trying to have no sound of its own. And all that means is that when you start using it, either you hit a preset and go, oh, that's cool, I'll use that, or you get lost in fooling with it, and there's no end to how much you fool with it. So when I do stuff like a plugin that has multiple tape heads, mostly I want to know, like, what's the purpose? Are you trying to do a Roland chorus kind of thing for more space? Are you trying to space stuff around in the stereo field? Are you trying to do reverb? Are you trying to do spacey psychedelia or whatever? Because I've got stuff like Melt. Melt works kind of like multiple tape head delays. It's just that it sounds kind of like multiple head delays that are all wiggling around randomly. And so maybe you already have what you wanted. That's one of the problems about having so many plugins out, is that people get lost. And I'm gonna have to work on that at some point. But I'll do something like Melt rather than something like this has 60 sliders. They don't actually fit on your screen, and you can configure it to do literally anything. I think it's better to have a bunch of different plugins that you can approach and go, okay, I want the wavy psychedelia sound. Melt, that sounds about right. And then you do that, and that's basically what it concentrates on, and it does whatever it can to get in that zone. So yeah, David mentions before I scroll down and catch up with everybody, because people are going ahead, which is good because that gives me stuff to talk about. The thing is, if there's harshness in remap, it's because I'm showing you it's there. You shouldn't turn it up that much. You could write it with automation if you have, it sounds right, and then all of a sudden a bunch of bass comes in, forcing everything to be louder. Then maybe you do want to write it down. But really, you don't want to be pushing it that hard. Just use it in contexts where it behaves better, or just don't push it that aggressively, because there's no getting rid of the harshest crackles that it can generate. It is, after all, just another transfer function generator. Monatorium also says, before actually even throwing money, which is okay, fair enough, White Sea Studio is correct about harmonic distortion on plugins compared to analog. This holds for my plugins as well. This holds for basically all plugins. Anything that you do that generates harmonics, and you don't always generate all the harmonics. There's like stuff that you can do regarding soft clipping. My sine wave based stuff has such a slow change in the transfer function that it likes to generate just one harmonic for most contexts. Like, you'll be running a sound through it, all the harmonics of the sound will be present, all the harmonics in that sound will get added to them, exactly one harmonic of each of those harmonics when you go. So basically how that works, I'm doing a really good answer for your $2, woot. Say you got your original sound, and your original sound has these harmonics, and you're doing, say, density or something. You're doing purist console, something that has a simple sine wave based distortion function. So this one is going to generate a sound harmonic that is like a third of its volume, because they are never as loud as the full volume. And it's going to be around here, say. Actually, they're harmonically related, so it's not going to be, but let's pretend that it's around here. And this one is going to generate something that's about a third of its volume at around here. And this one's going to generate something that's about a third of its volume at around here. And this one's going to generate something around here. If this is your Nyquist frequency, none of those will alias. None of them will alias. It doesn't matter that it's no longer a sine wave, as long as, you say this is a bass note. As long as the harmonics that you're working with are less than half of the highest Nyquist frequency, a really simple soft distortion that generates only the first harmonic isn't going to alias either. On the other hand, if you have a bunch of harmonics out of your signal, and it's like a nicely band-limited square wave, or it's a square wave with some of the stuff removed, and your highest harmonic is really loud and it's all the way up here, then, goes right up like this, and then the first harmonic from there might be fairly quiet, but that is actually going to be past Nyquist, so it is going to reflect back into here and be a unhelpful, ugly noise. A lot of these are just going to generate like aliasing all over the place. So White Sea is correct in that stuff. He is caught up with the general knowledge of the field in that that is how digital audio works. He is not wrong. He is exactly right. Now, in fact, his idea of using higher sampling rates is also a good workaround. And people often talk to me about that kind of stuff and go, why aren't you using oversampling? Well, a lot of the stuff that I do is about doing less processing to the poor, helpless original audio, because I feel it's a lot more fragile than people think. So I like to do less calculations on it and keep a very high bit depth and dither stuff to the outputs and so on. And when you're doing lots and lots and lots of calculations, you start generating a lot of the problems of doing too much calculating. So, yeah, David Fixley is being sarcastic, or at least very personal, in that EULAW does really weird things, and there are very few things that normal people can use it for. You can use it for a bit crusher, and normal people can use EULAW, bit crusher, and then EULAW decode and get useful results. But honestly, I should probably make a EULAW bit crusher as a standalone plugin. That's such a good idea. I'll make a note of it. Because otherwise you just have to put the 3 plugins together along with whatever else it is that you wanted to do. And there seems no reason to demand that. Not when EULAW BitCrush sounds so good. Because that's the thing. What EULAW really is supposed to do is it's a technique used on older digital samplers where your subtle noises get more of the bits, and then as stuff gets louder, it starts getting crunchier and grainier. So using EULAW on a bit crusher is really pretty good at getting old school sounds. That's it. Let's keep going because I got a bunch of stuff to get to in the scroll. We'll be live again once you got the scroll. Low-end bass kick relation. I've actually got a sidechain in my analog system. It is the monitor output, and it is running to a little Vactrol that I made on my reverb. So when I send stuff to the reverb, I can also turn up the monitor output. Right, for the last month or so, it hasn't actually been very active. But I can turn it up for the monitor output and have it duck away the reverb when the drum is loud. So there is that. But I'm not sure I'm not sure what Volume Shaper really does. Buttercomp fan, cool. Heh, $100 for coffee. I'll spend money on coffee. I get good coffee. I also encourage grinding your own coffee, using AeroPresses and things like that. AeroPress is great because it's fairly cheap and it makes really good coffee. And it's very handy and it uses less coffee filter than one might otherwise do. Oh boy. Yeah, let's talk rapidly past all of this stuff. Digital compressor. Choruses in general are going to be bucket brigade based if they are old school. That is the technology that we had back then. So choruses are always based on delays. Choruses are little short delays. And we've had the capacity to do little short delays for a long time. And it's the same kind of thing like in a Memory Man or whatever, where you have a long delay, but it's still bucket brigade devices. And if you make it go faster, you have a little more high resolution in that. Same deal with the Roland stuff, that you'll have echoes. They're analog delay echoes. They're just very, very quick. That's how you do a chorus. Philly nerds are funny. Yeah, we've always been funny. Ubermod is cool. I am a big fan of Valhalla for some things. I don't tend to use this stuff just because I think of other things that I want to do, but I'm all over some of the craziness that you can do with the Valhalla stuff. I do not know whether they are actually sounding like Roland Dimension presets. That's a pedal I'd like to get. I'd like to get that guitar pedal. And perhaps at some point I will. There is a YouTube set of YouTube guys called That Pedal Show, and they are good at putting together fairly high production value guitar pedal analyses, and they will zero in on things like, here are 3 different clones of the Roland Dimension chorus, and then they'll show you each of them. I have found That Pedal Show to be very handy. So if I was to look for the Dimension style chorus, I would go and look for an episode that they did and see whether they've talked about that stuff. Pitch swerve doesn't necessarily help to mix bass. In fact, I don't think that necessarily the Roland stuff has that pitch swerve. I said that the pitch swerve was part of Rockman's, and it's also part of the Delta Labs Effectron, which I've got several of. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily part of the Roland thing. Oh, by the way, David, no, I've got live chat. So far I've got live chat. I'm scrolled up. Yep. Yeah, I was telling Whitesy about the thumbs down as an engagement. You know, if you really want to ignore somebody on YouTube, ignore them. Don't go around thumbing down them. You're only helping them. Let's see, multiplugs, for sliders. Yeah, he was trying to say I would understand all the things that were going on in the plug, and you know, I think I do. I watched his video, and the stuff that it was talking about, I more or less know what that stuff is about, but knowing what it's about isn't necessarily that much help. Like, you don't necessarily want to move around the delay taps to taste. I arranged the delay taps by prime number spacings. You can space delay taps more intelligently rather than just like, oh, I feel like moving this one here. That's not a very useful change to make. But at the same token, however, it's cool to have it out there. I'm not going to do that. Somebody should. Melda is the place that does that. So awesome. Yeah, check out Melt for the crazy delay thing. That might do something for you. Writing gains. Just aliasing. And we're caught up. Unless people post really fast. So, you know, Idimit.v, that's exactly what I'm talking about doing. I made a note for myself. Yola Bitcrush standalone. It would make all the sense in the world to produce a Bitcrusher where remap is built into it in the internal stages, because that will give you the old school Bitcrush effect as a standalone device that you only need to instantiate 1 plugins. Yes, you can do that with 3 different Airwindows plugins in a row. But in 1 plugin, you can do it while not returning to whatever the bus depth is. I can do it at long double. Not that it really matters that much for... it might matter a little bit. It depends upon whether, kind of like you can hear jitter. Can you hear if the spacing of Bitcrushed square wavy-like stuff is perfectly evenly spaced? And I don't know if that's necessarily so. But you can certainly build them into a single plugin. And I think that would be a darn good idea, so I need to add that to my list, and I am doing so. I am adding it to my list. Having a quick look at the things that are on my list. So there's EQ sidechain ducking. Yep. Yep. David is correct. He should be making plugins. If you can get to the point of doing that, then you'd be off and running and doing stuff that might be interesting to people. Because part of it is being able to ask these questions and doing dumb stuff. This is why I'm always so fierce when people post a question. And if I say like, oh no, that's not like that at all, they'll delete the question. And I'll be like, no, don't delete the question. It's important to ask dumb questions, or it's important to have wrong ideas and explore stuff, because otherwise how are you going to inspire other ideas and get other stuff going on? It's really important stuff. So, in a sense, that's why I would like to see David doing plugins, is because David is capable of trying some of the crazy things that can turn out to be horribly wrong. Sometimes the horribly wrong stuff gets you your best results because it turns into something else. And the something else that it turns into winds up being, the magics. It's being willing to try stuff where you don't know what it's going to do, or paying attention when something is doing something different that you didn't expect, and then being able to listen and understand what the thing that you've done is actually doing, rather than just being hung up on, like, no, it was supposed to do this. If it's not doing this and instead it's going crazy, you need to be able to listen to what it's doing so that you can interpret what you're hearing and going like, oh, okay, it's not doing the equalization at all, but instead it makes the entire sound like Jello. I guess I have a new Jello plugin. And that's the stuff that's really interesting and amusing. So yeah, we got about a half an hour to go. Yeah, Glitch Shifter is not out as VST yet. Glitch Shifter is on my list as far as I'm going to dig into this. It won't necessarily be easy. It's a very complicated, messy plugin done a long time ago. So it's not necessarily going to be an easy task even to just directly port it over. But all the same, that's on the list of stuff that I'm going to include. See, I'm not sure. David mentions adding a shelf boost to Remap. I don't know if I'd necessarily do anything of this sort, because it's a different category of stuff. Remap has no relation to frequency at all. It is it's one of those ones like console or whatever that is transfer function and transfer function alone. It might sound like as you're pushing it too far, it's generating high frequencies, so you should turn down high frequencies, but that's really not what's going on. It's just reshaping the sound on a sample by sample basis in a characteristic way. So it doesn't care whether it's 96, it doesn't even have to care what the sample rate is. Remap is only reshaping like how close together or far apart. Here, I can draw a picture that'll do a better job of showing what this is about. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, from 0 loudness to all the loudness. Then this is the transfer function. You take the loudness of this, and anything that comes in at like 9, make it be this 9. That's what a transfer function is. You can do diagrams and stuff. I've got, like, I tried to draw it like this. It's possibly confusing. It's looking like, there are curves and lines and things and all that sort of stuff. And that's all well and good. I can draw another one where it's like, it moves down from here. But all that really is there's two charts. This one goes from 0 to 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this one goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it goes up as far as this. Take any number and assign it to this number. The same number, like 9 goes to 9. 3 goes to 3. 1 goes to 1. Very little change there. And this is a saturation filter. This makes this stuff go much closer together. Or you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is a lot closer to a hard clipper. With this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're the same until you get to this point where it's like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And it won't let it get any louder. Or it could just all be one spot. And that's a hard clip. Anything above this point just goes here. That's what a transfer function is. So it does not actually do anything with frequencies at all. And that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes transfer functions so handy for doing stuff like live tracking, because you can run a plugin like that, and the plugin doesn't have to delay anything in order to do its work. Transfer functions can also be reversible as long as they're not so tightly spaced that they wind up being the same number. Like if you made all this stuff go together to be the same number, you can't expand them back outwards again because they're all going to be the same number. But if they're just very closely spaced, you could write a transfer function where it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everything from 6 to 7 gets spread out to be like this. And that's what remap is about. Remap lets you sort of wing it and get into a zone where you're taking this squished down area and expanding it back out again with a fair degree of accuracy if it's distorted just right. And any harmonics that this generates, harmonics get generated by how intensely you've moved the position of these spaces. Like you could have it where like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And just everything would get squished together into the middle, and that would be a weird, ugly, distorty sound. And still, doable. You can do ugly, crazy things with transfer functions. The reason mine are done with single algorithms is that you're never actually just literally taking 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's a continuous process. So you got to do algorithms that apply this kind of thing as a continuous process. So like, 7 3/4 goes to exactly the right spot in here. And if there are any discontinuities, and I mean any discontinuities with the smoothness of that function, people notice. I had a plugin called Channel way back in the day, which I still have. I've made a bunch of versions of it. I've kind of stopped making new versions of it. It originally existed just to show what the underlying stuff in my programming was about. So it would change only to adjust things like the anti-aliasing or whatever. But I had a version of the plugin that rather than just doing a smooth curve for distortion, it would go here. So you'd have a perfectly straight amplitude curve up to a point, and that's when it would start to switch over to the curve. This is actually present in the plugin that I've got out, Crystal, that a guy desperately wanted. But it was the same thing as what I was calling New Console. I ended up calling it New Console because it was a disaster. And the reason why that is true is because people somehow were able to hear when it switched from the smooth and undistorted, just dry, raw signal to this point where it switches over to it starts curving. And they did not like the sound of it going only to a certain point, switching over, and then suddenly it's doing a steady curve going on. This is one of the reasons why I did Spiral, to have that extra curve going on, but then linearly switch to the straight as a matter of degrees. because having a position on the transfer function where it's like beyond this we start distorting, people hate the sound of that. They just hated the sound of that. People are very sensitive to that apparently. And you wouldn't guess it just out of the blue. It was my experience that showed me that, because I tried it and got like a chorus of horror and dismay and people going, ah, put it back. Oh my God, it's terrible. It's terrible. Put it back. So let's keep catching up with some of this commentary. High shelf is something that's not gonna make any sense to me right now, unfortunately. Excuse me. AI Heim is talking about an old delay unit. Remember, I don't clone things as a rule. I'd rather invent stuff that's kind of the essence of some particular concept. Let's see. See, I am not sure. I don't really buy into the idea of behaving as if things are just frequencies. You can decompose audio into frequencies, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's useful to work in that way, because sort of the overall tapestry of the sound, the waveform as it sort of undulates and changes and shifts, I think there is merit in being a lot more true to that and a lot less true to this breaks down into frequencies, and we can do MP3s by dividing it into the frequencies and then encoding those and then reconstructing it. And it's like, we already know how that works and we've lost a lot from that. So I'm very cautious of getting into frequencies. It imitated Avi with this idea about the compressor and the two remaps or whatever it is that you're doing. I think you need to experiment with that. Find out. Try it and find out, because I have not tried that. Yeah, raw timbers and raw glitters are going to do you literally nothing regard to in tandem with remap, because they are very quiet and remap only works on stuff that is very loud. Yeah, there may be other things I can do with that sort of S-curve thing. Remap is the first thing, and it is in some ways, I think, the most useful. But there might be other stuff in there as well. It's just the more aggressively you start getting weird with it, the more obnoxious and artificial the sound is going to become. And there's a limit to, like, people start just complaining. Remap's extreme positions go to a place where you start getting a flat-topped, distorted wave, and it's still a curved onset to the wave. But it's starting to do that weird shaping of things, and as soon as it starts doing that, people start hating the sound. So it's kind of designed the way it is for a reason. The idea is that if you're starting to hear it misbehave, you've already got it set too high. Not dissimilar to the acceleration limiter. Oh, Bo has found a weird rectification technique. I'm not sure how useful that actually is. But yeah, you can switch positive waveforms to left and negative waveforms to right. And oh boy, is that going to be messy. I do not know if there is a way to smooth the sharp cutoffs, because basically you're talking about half-wave rectification, and that is all about the sharp cutoffs. I'm not going to explore that too hard, because if I just start talking about things, I can. This is the reason that David Pixley is my friend. I am just as capable of running my mouth on a bunch of weird ideas and going like, oh, well, the taking positive to left and negative to right is not very useful except for when you fill in the gaps with the reconstructed exactly the same volume sine wave thing from the sine wave on zero crossings. And it's like, I can say that. I can't necessarily do it. It's not necessarily going to work. I mean, it'd be weird. It'd be a thing, but that would be a big mess too. And yeah, I'm not promising to do that one because I kind of don't see it. But again, I'm just as capable of running my mouth and going, oh, you could do this and you could do this and you could do this. And wouldn't that be cool? And people will hear that on my live stream and be like, oh, that'd be amazing. Make me one. Make me one by next week. And I probably won't have made one by next week. But yeah, splitting mono to stereo that way is not generally considered useful. And I don't think there's a semi-simple way to smooth those cutoffs. It's kind of just you're stuck with the cutoffs. Microsynth. Yeah, I've wanted to get one of those myself. Electro-harmonics guitar synthesizer. Basically what that guitar synthesizer is doing is it's doing a kind of gated square wave generation. So it's taking the input of the guitar and just full clipping it, but in such a way that it gates and cuts off sometimes. And then it's running that through a octave divider, so that's your low octave. And some kind of thing that'll convert the square wave into more of a sawtooth wave, and then it's got some filters, and that's about the deal. It's like envelope followers and filters and things. Bo was talking about the polarity. Yeah, raw timbres and glitters act beautifully within U-Law because U-Law brings up quiet stuff, but raw timbres and glitters are that much quieter that you're still not going to hear it. And yeah, that stereo splitter would be very distorty indeed. The slew only and subs only are not a crossover. They're most definitely not. You could use them as two different crossovers to a point. Slew only you can use as a crossover if you have like two tracks. One of them is slew only, and then one of them is combined with the slew only and then inverted phase of the original track, so they combine together to give you the opposite. It's like the inverse of slew only. Then you would be able to make slew only be a crossover. I don't think you can make subs only be that much of a crossover because it's not a simple EQ. Subs only is like a variation on the 2-tape or Fathom 5 or all those different kinds of sub-bass enhancers, which is why it can give incredibly deep subsonic noises and keep them confined within the output of the regular track. It acts more like a bass amp than it acts like a simple crossover. So you can't really use subs only as a crossover. It's kinda maybe, but it's not going to behave very, very sensibly. It'll get messed up. It'll start giving you inverse harmonics and things, by which I mean that if you've got it canceling stuff out, it's not going to be consistently canceling stuff out by frequency. It's too volume dependent. Oh, David, you don't have to give me a microsynthesizer. If you really want to do that, put it up on Reverb or something, and I'll buy it. And I'll buy your microsynth. But you sure don't have to. You don't have to give me a free pedal. It's I'm actually using the Alpha Junos for guitar synthesizer duties a lot more. Although there is still ways I could, basically, if I had one, and maybe you should put it on Reverb, and then I'll buy it off of you, so that I, A, will have one, and B, I can have your microsynth. But I would not. Don't just give it to me. You got less money than me. But what I would be doing is my pedal board, which I've recently reshuffled a little bit, although I still need to make proper cables for it, has a pedal that says SYN on it, S-Y-N. And when you hit that relay, it switches it to the guitar to MIDI converter and never goes back. So that's muting the amplifier. But if I, yeah, well, dude, if you sold me the microsynth, your PayPal would not be at 0. If I had one of those, what I would be doing is going out of the MIDI, the guitar to MIDI converter, which would continue to do the guitar synthesizer stuff, and into the microsynth and then back in. So what I'd get is the synthesizer. A microsynth is worth more than a soldering iron and some other stuff, which I do still have that soldering iron ready to send you, but I don't know what your address is, so don't tell us on live stream. That would be unwise. But PM me or something. But what I'd be able to do there is have the Roland doing guitar synthesizer duties in mono, and kind of so is the microsynth, honestly. But then the microsynth would be going into the guitar amplifier, and it would be simultaneous synthy style sounds. So that would be good. Let's keep following some of these things so that I don't fall behind too much, because I've only got about 12 minutes left. Console 6, console 5, then console 6. Try it. They're just different transfer functions, so it's just going to become different. I can't tell you exactly what they would be. I know that it would not be what was planned, but all it's going to do is provide different combinations of sounds. Maybe it'll be spikier, maybe it'll be more distorted. But try it. Combine the things. Combine all the things. So... CV2, I'm not sure what CV is. CV12. Tube microphone. And the vocals, well, maybe... Rick, it's possible that your mic into the pre is just not able to put out the amount of high frequency zap to really fit with like Golden Age pre also sounds like a tube styley thing, and if you get so much of that combined together, what you wind up getting is a rather soft muted sound, especially if the pre or the mic or both are like low voltage tubes and stuff. You can wind up Advantone. You can wind up the real old school tube stuff ran on super high voltages, and it was not about like, oh, softer, mellower tube sounds. And so when you've got modern designed tube things, they don't necessarily have the clarity and distinctness that you'd have out of legitimate old school tube stuff. So one thing that could happen by having a little too much of that stuff going on is that you might wind up sounding like the vocalist has a lisp, just because the sort of transistory edge that you're obviously trying to avoid has been so effectively removed that you don't have enough clarity. And probably a lot of the other vocals sound very sort of warm and dimensional and rounded and stuff, but you're paying a price with that combination of things where it's just not able to put out the high frequency power that you need for loud S's. And yeah, boosting about 7 dB, that is pretty weird. That's a combination of mic and pre that I would say don't really work all that well. You could probably use it for something like guitars, if you wanted them to be like Journey and really smooth. So back over to, and again, as far as this is concerned, yes, I've got the soldering iron and stuff. PM me on Gear Sluts. We'll talk about making some kind of exchange. And the Electro-Harmonix microsynthesizer, though I do indeed want one, is worth more than just a couple of soldering irons, so I'll have to figure out something else to add. But I'll figure out something else to add, and it doesn't have to be PayPal. Yeah. Bo asks, is Reverb better for selling stuff than eBay? Not necessarily. See, the reason that I look for Reverb is because it's easy to do a search for, I'll Google search like Reverb and some kind of piece of, Eurorack gear or whatever, and it'll always turn up a bunch of stuff. It's a place that is kind of like a musical instrument style marketplace, kind of like a musical instrument style Amazon, not so much like eBay. So it's not nearly as much like, bid to get the thing at a good price. And it's more like, all buy it now, essentially. So basically, I like going there because it's this sort of Amazon-y like conglomeration of different sellers that are focusing on musical instrument stuff without being Amazon. So that works out for me pretty well. I don't know whether it works well in Sweden. That is something that you would have to get back to me on, because I do not know whether that would actually work. Golden Age is a transistor-based 1073 clone. Well, for whatever reason, that combination of things, it seems like if you had to boost that much in the highs to get sibilance to happen, then something about that combination is awfully mellow. It's very, very mellow. Oh, David, you're making me happy. I'm sure pleases you. A loud rock metal singer. Yeah, I would vastly prefer larger, older guitar stomp boxes rather than newer, microscopic, tiny ones. So all to the better. If you can come up with a picture for me, I will figure out some way of making this worth your while over and above the soldering irons. I'm not exactly sure how, but I'll figure out something. But yeah, that's gonna be great. PM me. We will do that, and I'll be quite excited about it. So one last question. Do I have a tape recorder with high resolution for recording directly inside the DAW? No, none of my plugins are able to record files. They're all working in the context of how plugins are supposed to work. So no, I've got nothing like that. And lastly, I've made a little bit of progress. I'll tell you in the last couple of minutes while I keep an eye out for other questions and things. We're probably done with questions, but I'll keep an eye out. The thing I was talking about with regard to going and doing some kind of Minecraft stream, which probably doesn't have to be tied to a Patreon thing, but you'd have to be on the Patreon to get involved in the chat if that's something that I bring in. I was talking with Whitesy about maybe doing something game-oriented, and he has some willingness to fool around with Minecraft, which is, of course, sort of ever popular. Minecraft is like the Studer tape recorder of video games. And I went in and rehacked the mod that I use. Yeah. Last question by David about ULaw. As always, the answer is I have no idea, and maybe it'll make all kinds of really noisy craziness. So, bad idea? Depends on what you like. Maybe that's exactly your thing. But yeah, regarding the Minecraft thing, I started logging on to the server, which is now up and available, although I think I might have it whitelisted. I'm going to have to check and make sure find out whether people can log on or not. I've got it set up so that it restarts itself at midnight Eastern Standard Time. And I have also updated it with the plugin where it's got that thing going on where Kerbal Space Corps program would be an even better choice for the two of us, but I don't think I have a computer that can handle it that well, not and stream at the same time. But I got the Minecraft plugin, the Minecraft mod, that yeah, David, you must consider that carefully, because if you have real issues with like obsessive game playing, it might be a fine idea to just like watch us doing it and not get into it. But that said, it is possible. One of the things that would happen is I'd prefer to see people who can be on a Discord server that I can have live on stream so that we can hear many people talking rather than just me and Whitesea. That would be ideal. That would also be associated with, probably if it's my server and my idea, it'll probably be my Patreon. So one of the things that you'd be doing is being part of the Patreon, and perhaps one of the bonuses to making some kind of pledges that you get to participate in this kind of thing. And the update I've got is set up so that with this plugin that I programmed myself to make Minecraft crazier, and I have now hidden it from I had a fork of it, and I've hidden it from the site in the Airwindows GitHub. Mind you, you can still find it somewhere, but it has the, if you haven't marked off a chunk of space with a diamond block placed somewhere in the exact center of it, from the sky to bedrock, that protects stuff from being regenerated, and everything that is not protected gets regenerated every day when we start it out. When the server reboots, it throws away all the changes and goes back to scratch. So if you were underground at the time, you've dug yourself a cave, your cave is now gone, and you're asphyxiating in nothingness. So it's kind of newbie unfriendly, but it's also, it restores itself if you destroy it, and I think that might be useful. So we will see, because the Snowball Madness mod lets you do things like throw grenades and giant bombs and stuff fairly easy and accessibly. You got to be able to get snow from somewhere, but with that in mind, the regeneration thing has its place. So I guess we'll see whether that amounts to anything, and I'll keep you posted on whether Whitesea is up to speed and is talking. We're talking about that kind of stuff. It's just that it's neither of our first priorities, and we'll have to come up with a time and presumably a day of the week, because I run everything on what day of the week I do stuff. And once I've committed to doing something like that, I'll do it on a regular basis. So we shall see. I have set up, the server is running. It is configured, I believe, to what we're going to need it to be. And more will be revealed as far as that is concerned. So, with that in mind, it is 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time in Vermont. My coffee is almost gone. It certainly is cold because it's been 2 hours. So, David, we have an Airwindows Discord server. I literally already have the Discord server. If you are one of my patrons and that's something that you can do, if you're a heavy Discord user, yeah, I will happily trade you swapping the soldering irons and the electroharmonic stomp box for getting to be on the Discord server. You just tell me if that's something that you would like to do. Then and you're hip to Discord servers and part of that kind of stuff, and you can it's a very quiet Discord server and not much is happening, so I wouldn't expect a lot of lively stuff going on. But if you want in and you're prepared to send me that stomp box and stuff, and we already talk a lot and stuff, then you should be in whether or not you're one of my patrons. If you are one of my patrons, you automatically get to be on it. So yeah, yep. And again, the Discord server is a place where I will have a voice chat available for multiple Airwindows patrons to be on the stream of the Minecraft stream. Actually, it could easily get to the point of having people be in this chat as well. I just haven't set it up yet. But that is something that could conceivably happen. And there hasn't been any need for anybody to be a moderator. There's basically just me, and there's a bunch of different ranks based on how many, equivalent to how many plugins you've got, and that's mostly for just like fancy pants separate chat rooms for people to be in. It's not really serious in terms of like, these are the ranks of your importance. It's just a more casual thing. But anyway, yeah, PM me. We will do that exchange of soldering irons for stuff, and I will point you to the Discord server and let you be on it. Absolutely. With that, I will bid you guys good day for now, and I'll catch up with you next week, and I'll have another plugin for you next week, which is probably going to be podcast, unless some other amazing thing happens. And we'll see what I got going for the music jam tomorrow, because the music jam tomorrow is possibly going to include the strobe light that's timed to the kick drum. So I'll see how that works. It might be really good. It might be not very useful. I know one thing is not going to be incredibly bright because the light levels aren't going to really comply to it. But in any case, I will talk to you guys later. So bye-bye. See you next week.